And we are live.
Hello, I'm Carl Smart, and I am part of moderating a panel this afternoon. The Community Remembrance Project, along with United Church of Gainesville, is sponsoring a panel discussion on the movie Just Mercy. The Community Remembrance Project is part of the county's overall Truth and Reconciliation program. And the program is designed to have conversations, to stir conversations in the community about some horrific incidents that occurred in our history, and not just Alachua County, but in Florida and across the South, across the nation, some lynchings that occurred. The Alachua County has partnered with the Equal Justice Institute of Montgomery. And the Equal Justice Institute was founded by Brian Stevenson. Brian Stevenson is a renowned lawyer, renowned attorney, Harvard educated attorney, who he represents persons who he feels have been wrongly convicted, starting with persons who are on death row. And so Mr. Stevenson has really been busy working, reviewing cases and helping to represent persons who he felt were underrepresented or not even represented at all, and end up being convicted of major crimes. But Mr. Stevenson and the Equal Justice Initiative, we refer to them EJI. EJI has branched out and they've done the research on lynchings that occurred and found that over 4,400 lynchings have occurred throughout the South, throughout this nation, during the period between 1877 and 1950. And he's documented that, and they have commemorated those occurrences in the Legacy Museum and the National Museum for Truth and Justice in, make that the National Memorial for Peace and Justice in Montgomery, Alabama. If you haven't been to the Legacy Museum or the memorial in Montgomery, I would certainly recommend that. Seeing those museums sometime, the memorials, what a wonderful job they've done in commemorating and setting up those museums. But this afternoon, we're talking about the movie Just Mercy. And we have a great panel, distinguished panel this afternoon. We have with us the public defender for Alachua County, Ms. Stacy Scott. And we also have community activists, very active in the community and serving on a lot of committees and all, Ms. Shanae Jackson. And so we have both persons will speak to their thoughts on the movie and how some of the events in the movie relate to what's happening today in Alachua County. We regret that our newly elected sheriff, Sheriff Clovis Watson, will not be with us this afternoon. Unfortunately, he's busy working on duties. In fact, he was just sworn in earlier this week. So, you can imagine how busy he is. And so we regret he won't be with us this afternoon, but we are glad to have Ms. Stacy Scott and Ms. Shanae Jackson. Let us start, if you will, with the very first question, and they can introduce themselves and respond to the first question for the panelists. And the first question is simply, what impressions from the movie Just Mercy most affected you, and in what ways does the movie reflect some aspects, if you will, of the situation right here in Alachua County? And if you don't mind, Ms. Jackson, if you would start.
My name is Shanae Jackson. I am a native of Gainesville. Most people call me an activist. I just say I'm a community organizer. So it's accidental. I will say that. Um, for me, well, to let people know I am involved in quite a few things. It is very important to me that we always uplift and take care of our most vulnerable in our community. I do believe by us doing that, it is actually how we cure or address many of the social issues that we actually have in the community. I believe that by fixing those issues, we reduce things like incarceration and the criminalization of basically Black people. These things are important to me because with Gainesville, we have the highest disparities in every quality of life indicator. And when you look at incarceration, it typically is attributed to things like poverty and lack of jobs, lack of housing, and mental health issues that need to be addressed. So by addressing those, I think that we can make the biggest impact. For me, I want to say, well, I have impressions of the movie. I actually didn't watch the movie until it was time to do this. So as I shared before we came on, I typically don't watch movies like this because they're extremely triggering. And they're extremely triggering because typically I can personally identify with people who are impacted in ways that we saw the characters in the movie. Some things that really stood out to me is that when the main character, Johnny D is what they call him, Mr. McMillan, he was a person that worked hard. He took care of his family. He actually was self-employed. When you watch the movie toward the beginning, you want to believe that this is Alabama back in the 50s or the 60s. It's not until in the middle of the movie that you realize that this is like 1986, which wasn't that long ago. And even when the sheriff that pulled him over, he questioned him about his vehicle because he had a nice vehicle, and so automatically it wasn't deemed that he should be able to have a nice vehicle. When the sheriff talked to him, the first thing he asked is, "Well, who do you work for?" And then he said that he worked for himself. That kind of caught the sheriff off guard. Even as you watch through the movie and some of the him and even other members, you listen to what happened to them in the judicial system. You hear ineffective counsel. You hear people came even when they had paid attorneys who worked until the money ran out and then they ran off. We got to see the impact that it had on his family. A lot of people don't talk about that particular component of it. We talk about people being incarcerated, but we don't know how expensive it is that we spend thousands of dollars a month in order to offer support to people that are incarcerated. And that's just for basic things, like soap. So for me, those were impressions that really stood out to me. Also, even in the town they lived in, the Black people, you had to travel to where they were. So it was very different when somebody took the time to even travel to where they were to see how they lived, to see things that were so important. And then it also, the impression that I got is he's like one of many that's placed into a system. And even though he was innocent, he was made to be the person responsible for fighting his way out. And even people that stood up to fight on his behalf, even when all the evidence pointed that he should have been let go, they still fought in order not to have that to happen, in order to uphold a system.
All right, thank you. And yeah, you're absolutely right. The movie is a very serious movie. We were talking just before coming on live how serious it was, and the two stars, the actors, are Michael B. Jordan and Jamie Foxx. And as most folks know, those two actors can be very serious. They're very dramatic, and so they did. I think they did an excellent job dealing with a very difficult subject. The movie is about the life of Brian Stevenson, a snapshot, a piece of his life, how he finished Harvard Law School and went straight to work in Alabama. He passed the Alabama bar and started doing that kind of work. So a very serious movie. So understood. Miss Scott, if you would respond to that question.
Sure. Thanks, Carl. I'm Stacy Scott. I'm the public defender for the 8th Judicial Circuit, which actually encompasses 6 counties in our area. I've been with the Public Defender's Office for about 23 years now, and I've been the Chief Public Defender Agency Head for the last 10 years. Our office handles every manner of criminal offense, all the way from juvenile offenders or people who are charged as juveniles, all the way through defending people who are facing the death penalty. So we are the primary criminal defense law firm in the area, and we are funded by the state, and our charge is to defend people who are facing a loss of liberty, who cannot afford to hire an attorney. And really, we represent, I would say, 75 to 80% of the people that come through the courthouse on any given day or week. So we take our mission extremely seriously, and all of our lawyers are extremely dedicated to fighting for justice for each one of our clients, one case at a time. In watching the movie, parts of it were hard to watch, because I know that the injustice that Johnny B suffered has happened many times over in our state and in our country, particularly in the past, or possibly even present, where states do not adequately fund the public defense system. So here in Florida, we have a statewide uniform public defense system where there's 20 separate public defender agencies that cover the different judicial circuits in the state. And compared to other states in the Deep South, we are doing much better than a lot of the other states in the Deep South who either don't have statewide systems, don't even have countywide systems, where sometimes it's just up to a judge to just appoint a private practitioner to represent an indigent case. And you can see in the film how that plays out for people who've had attorneys who didn't spend time on their case, who didn't put the work or the effort into it. Because if you're a person appointed to an indigent case, particularly in the past, they don't get paid enough to spend a lot of time on the case. And so a lot of injustice resulted from lack of funding of a public defense system, which was actually ordered to be in existence in 1964 by the United States Supreme Court in the case of Gideon v. Wainwright. So we know that our adversarial system of justice relies on a well-funded defense, relies on attorneys that are paid well and that have the resources to be able to investigate and defend cases. And without that, then there isn't justice. Justice doesn't just happen. That's one of the other themes that came out in this movie. Justice is the result of a fight. You have to fight for justice, and the fight is not fair and cannot be fair if the defense lawyer, in particular the public defenders, don't have the resources they need to defend cases. So, justice, in my view, really comes about through a fair fight from both sides. You have the state attorneys who are representing the interests of the government and the people, and you have the defense attorney. And we represent the interest of our client. And our duty is to zealously defend our client, to make sure that they get equal justice, no matter who they are, no matter where they come from, what color they are, what their financial resources are. And that's our mission. And in order to do that, we have to have enough lawyers to do it. We have to have enough money to do it. And I know that in the past, in particular, they did not have that. And even today, we are underfunded vis-a-vis the state attorneys and other state agencies. So it was hard to watch parts of the movie. My lawyer side wanted to kind of be like, well, wait a minute, we work hard for our clients, but in order to right wrongs that have occurred in the past and to improve what we have now, you've got to face the inadequacies, and you've got to deal with it and figure out how we're going to make it better in one case at a time, starting today.
Absolutely. And it was certainly alarming to see the kind of numbers we're talking about of persons who were maybe on death row in prison, who have been found guilty because of inadequate representation, if you will. The numbers that EJI expressed now on their website, I saw that 172 people have been exonerated and released since the mid 70s. 1,529 have been executed in the United States since 1973. And so for every 9 that's executed, 1 person has been exonerated and released. And so that's alarming to know that the system can allow persons to fall through the cracks, if you will, because of inadequate representation or a lack of representation. So we are certainly appreciative of the Public Defender's Office and the tough job that you do. The second question, if you will, is when, going back to Ms. Jackson, when Walter McMillan, better known as Johnny D in the movie, when he first meets Brian Stevenson, he says that Black people in the South experience a world where you are guilty from the moment you are born. What a statement. In what ways do you see a presumption of guilt assigned to people of color manifesting itself maybe in the county, in our county today, in Alachua County? And if you will, particularly Ms. Scott, can you comment on plea bargaining in the presumption of guilt?
Am I going first?
Yes.
Okay, because I heard that you went to her. So even in that scene, one of the things that was even powerful before he stated that was his distrust for Mr. Stevenson. And that distrust is normal. And it is normal because you've put your trust in the system. Because even he stated when he first started out, he knew that he had his trust, he had the truth on his side. He thought that would be enough in order to exonerate him, was that he had the truth and there really was not an actual case, and that didn't happen. And then he saw others that came through and failed him. He saw other people that were incarcerated with him that were failed as well by a particular system. I myself could actually, it resonated with me personally, and then even with family members, because the reason I'm so adept and I know so much about the judicial system is because of the failures. I knew for me, I had to make sure that I became educated in order not to be a victim to the judicial system. And so I remember personally years ago getting into, it wasn't even an altercation at this particular time. I had someone who issued a sworn complaint. She said that I banged on her car window with a crowbar. And so for me, I wasn't even in town at the time and kept stating, then she said, well, maybe it was another incident that I actually had witnesses. And I remember I kept telling my public defender over and over, there are witnesses that this did not occur. There are witnesses that this did not occur. And my public defender said, oh, but the one that gave you this deal, but oh, you should take this deal. And she blatantly stood up in public court when I let the judge know, hey, I have to, and I was working at Shands at the time, I can't keep taking off from work. This is not true. I've let my public defender know that I have witnesses. And she bold-facedly lied in open court and said I did not. And so it was at that time, and that was pivotal. We're talking about 2002, that I knew from then that I felt like it seemed like my public defender, who should have been on my side, was actually on the side of the state. And so it went from that particular point, starting to make sure that I paid more attention. And it's that same deal. Even when you start out in school, I always talk about the school to prison pipeline. And for me, it's so important because they actually decide how many prison cells they're going to build or the capacity they need by the time a child is in 3rd grade by standardized test scores. And then when you look at data, Black children across the country, so not just here in Alachua County, even though the numbers are directly aligned, are 3 times more likely to be suspended. When you look at that, they're 11 times more likely for their suspensions or to be in trouble. Therefore, incidents that they're subjective. So when you look at the data, white students are more likely to be written up or in trouble for things like drugs, bringing weapons to school. And this is actual data. Black children get in trouble for things like insubordination, defiance. And so those kinds of things, and that's perception. So being a person who has worked within the school system and even provided childcare, I watched how, and these are teachers that were amazing, but the manner in which they viewed behavior of white children compared to Black children was very different. So white children, they got more chances. they got more opportunity, they got more nurturing. With Black children, it was you sit down, you're being defiant. Okay, I'm going to call your mom, and there was always a focus on the negative. Then even as I grew up in Gainesville and many of the poverty, what are considered poverty-stricken areas, which are Fifth Avenue, which is Woodland Park, we call it Sugar Hill, which is Lake Road. And what would happen is when law enforcement came in the neighborhoods, they weren't positive. It was always looking for something. Oh, you're standing outside, you got to be doing something wrong. So knowing these things, when you tell them to people, they're like, oh, that's not so. And I remember, as a matter of fact, it was you, Stacey, you did a presentation for the city of Gainesville at Delma Bolton. And that's where I learned about the article that was doing, I think, about the St. Petersburg Times regarding bias on the bench. When I went and read that article, even now, the manner in which they police the east side of Gainesville versus what happens on the University of Florida. And so you're looking at data that's actually been shown in order to see that. We're looking at even in our county where Black children are more likely to have negative interactions, Black people, then we make up such a small portion of the population. But even when it comes to incarcerations and going to DOC and different things, and personally, I've reached out to try to get help. I have a brother who he didn't even get into the fight. It was a part of it was altercation that happened outside of a club, which is basically a bar fight. And in that bar fight, even the victim stated he didn't know he wasn't one of the people that was involved. And so my brother, you're calling out of the jail and you're saying, I'm innocent of this. They're doing this because I'm Black. And in response, the state attorney doesn't take heed that, oh, they're doing it because I'm Black. He files a motion to limine, which means my brother can't talk about his race and say that that was a motivation for them being so diligent. And then, so even too, as a Black man, they say a jury of his peers, all of the jurors are white. Literally, there's zero evidence in the victim stating he did not do it. He actually was not only convicted, but then outside of Florida has a scoring system. He should have gotten 56 months by the scoring system. They gave him 10 years. And so it's those things. But you see bar fights happen all the time. We've seen them where they've gotten people are hospitalized, same thing, nose is being broken, but they're viewed very differently, where people get probation, where they get an opportunity to have another chance. And so you see that it's embedded in like everything that we do. I've even seen where we are victims of crime and we call law enforcement and they're aggressive with us as the actual victim, as if we've done something wrong, or even it's been told, well, you must have done something in order for this or that to happen, and blame us for being a victim of a crime.
Thank you. As a public defender, Stacey, I'm sure you face these kind of situations on a daily basis, and it must be really tough sometimes to deal with them. And so how do you respond to some of the situations that Ms. just talked about and came out in the movie?
Sure. Yes, the one of the primary difficulties we face when we walk into a courtroom to pick a jury is the presumption of guilt. And I think it is enhanced when your client is African American. I think, when there are racial biases existing in a community, those biases, and there are, those biases get enhanced and reflected in the courtroom. It doesn't all of a sudden go away because you're in a court of law and somebody, the judge, tells you, oh, you have to presume this person is innocent. And, and like, oh, okay, yeah, it's all good. All of our preconceived notions about everything are thrown out the window and we're going to hear the case. I mean, that's the goal of a juror. And that's what we're trying to vet when we are picking a jury, is to what extent can people do that in a case? And it is a major concern of ours when we're picking a jury and trying to find a fair jury for our client, when the jury pool is all white, and our client is Black. That's a concern, because we want people who can understand the life that the client has led, to some extent prior to coming into that courtroom, because there are so many factors that lead someone to be charged with a crime and sitting there in court. And so one of our big issues is, how are we going to overcome the sort of presumption of guilt? Because my client is sitting here, he must have done something, and I think it's probably like human nature to sort of think that in some ways, like, they didn't just randomly pull a guy or a lady off the street and put her in the courtroom and say, you're charged with this. Something happened. I think people, think that, and we have to make sure that we find ways to get to how people truly feel, and get to whether or not they can set aside things, or to what extent they can set aside things, and listen to the evidence that is presented, and hear it and consider it, and see and hold the state to their burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, because that is the highest burden in the law. And it's not very well defined in the jury instructions, in my opinion. And so, that's our job. Make sure we're going to have people that are going to stick to their opinion, listen to the facts, argue, debate, and then hold the state to that burden. On the issue of plea bargaining, yeah, plea bargaining is a reality of our criminal justice system. The overwhelming majority of the cases are resolved through some sort of plea bargaining, whether resolved means the case is dropped, or the charges are reduced, or we agree on a sentence, or whether we agree that we're going to argue for one type of sentence and the state attorney is going to argue for another. The problem with the plea bargaining system is that the state attorney has too much power in that system. It's not a level playing field. Because of draconian sentencing structures, such as minimum mandatories and other enhancements like prison releasee reoffender or habitual felony offender, those types of sentencing structures place so much power in the hands of the state attorney, that it becomes almost an irrational choice for a person who feels like they have a legitimate defense to a crime they've been charged with. It's almost irrational for them to go to trial, because if they lose, they're going to get mandatory 10, mandatory 20, mandatory life, and the judge has no discretion to change that sentence, even if the judge hears the evidence and feels like, wow, this person doesn't deserve that sentence. And so when you start out with the laws favoring the state attorney so much, that it puts an individual defendant at a real disadvantage. And it puts us as defenders at a disadvantage from the get-go, because people just have so much to lose if they even want to try to litigate their case, and guilt or innocence is not black and white. It's not clear cut. It's so often gray. And even if you in the light most favorable to the state or the defendant, it's like, you take a self-defense case, for example. One person's legitimate self-defense, facts, or another person's, you murdered somebody. And so, like we as lawyers, and the jurors as jurors, if they get the chance to hear it, are trying to determine, was this, a reasonable act in light of all the circumstances? Did this person really feel that their actions were necessary because they were in danger of, serious bodily injury or death? So it's not clear cut in most cases. And so when we're in that situation, oftentimes, and when a client is in that situation, the most rational choice is to try to strike a plea bargain, because of the unlevel playing field that they're kind of put on when they're charged with the crime, and the sentences can be so harsh and are totally in the discretion and control of the state attorney.
Here's a couple of quick questions, Stacey, that come up based on your remarks. And we could get into some discussion about the whole Florida stand your ground law too, but we won't do that today. But a couple of questions from the chat is, who pays public defenders? How is your budget put together? Is it the local municipalities, the county, or the state? And then secondly, are your public defenders burdened with too many cases?
Okay, great question. In Florida, the public defenders are paid by the state of Florida. So we are a state agency, and there's 20 separate public defender offices throughout the state of Florida, and they're divided by judicial circuit. So we're in the 8th Judicial Circuit. So the 8th Judicial Circuit Public Defender's Office gets a budget for paying, employees, and then a separate budget for the money that we use to defend cases. So, when our distrusting clients say, "Oh, you're working for the state," well, kind of we are in a sense, because we are state employees. But the great thing about the public defender system that we have in Florida, as opposed to other areas, is that we are less subject to the types of local political pressures that are felt in other areas where the public defender system is appointed by the city council or the county commission. Where, okay, think about the movie, think about that state attorney in Just Mercy, who even though he the new state attorney who took over the case in the resentencing phase, he thought there were problems, but he was under this incredible political pressure to not upset that conviction, and so the opposite is true in other areas in the country where, if me as a public defender, if my boss is the city manager and I can get fired at any time if I work too hard on a case or if I cause too many waves in defending a case, I might bow to that pressure to sort of just do an okay job but not a great job, or do what's required minimally but not really fight. We don't have that. Okay, I am an independent elected constitutional officer, and my attorneys are charged with zealously defending their client, and that's what they're going to do. And so we have a lot of protection because of the structure of our public defender system. To the question of whether or not we have too many cases, sure, we have too many cases. We have more attorneys now than we've ever had in the circuit, and the attorney to case ratio has been lowered during my tenure as the public defender in the last 10 years, because we've put more attorneys on the front line. And the caseloads in the state of Florida have decreased statewide. The number of filed criminal prosecutions in the state of Florida, and don't quote me totally on this, has gone down, I'd say about 25 to 30% in the last 10 years. And so that has helped alleviate some of the pressure on the public defenders, but they still have more cases than they should, more cases than the American Bar Association recommends that they handle in a given year.
That's great. Okay, good news there. We're discussing Just Mercy, a movie based on part of the life of Bryan Stevenson. And so this evening it's a very difficult discussion, but we've got some great panelists talking about it, Ms. Stacy Scott and Ms. Sinead Jackson, and I'll go to her now. And also I have the third question for you, Ms. Jackson. But I'll let
I wanted to weigh in before you get to the
first to something said by Ms. Scott.
Yes. So I wanted to weigh in not necessarily by something that was said to Ms. Scott, but something I want to make the community aware of. So one of the things that I know we've been studying is something called participatory defense, and then also community courtroom advocacy. And so even to the public defenders that I've encountered in her office now that's been working with Stacy, they have been amazing. But there's a puzzle piece that even as public defenders, because so many people don't trust the actual system, there's a role that some of us in the community can play. So there's a young man that I'm helping now who is accused of a sexual battery charge. And with that, once I started as a community member to dig, there's just no way. But when it comes to getting witnesses and things like that together, witnesses are, number one, afraid to come forward, not because they're afraid for him, just because they don't trust the system. There is information that a public defender or any attorney for that matter may not even come across. So there's a way that I'm helpful with that. But then also as it pertains to judges, us as community members being there, being participatory, watching the things that are going on in a courtroom, those things make a huge difference. They make a difference when it pertains to first appearance. They make a difference as they actually go through the actual journey as it pertains to them offering a proper and appropriate defense for their clients. And so there's an example of one young man who was arrested because his cousin had gotten into an altercation, a female cousin, and he was 15. He shot a gun up in the air, and they were trying to sentence him to 15 to 25 years. And it was one of those things, the family does not have any resources, didn't know who to turn to, so they didn't even know what to ask for. The attorney doing the best that they can. And so one of the things that each family I've ever told to do this, everybody in your family, get together, put on decent clothes, and everybody go together as a family unit and show that they have family support. Even with his family member, well, that's going to be too late. Literally, he was heading to sentencing, and I told him to do that and to have a few members from that family actually speak on his behalf. So he went from, he grew up in jail, so he was in Alachua County jail for 4 years. He went from expecting to go to court that day and was sentenced to a 15-year plea deal to they sent him to a youth offender camp, and he would actually be out in 4 years. And so the community and families also need to understand the role that they can play in this in order to help public defenders that are overburdened, to help public defenders that are trying the best in order to mount that defense for their client and they're trying to get information. If a public defender doesn't have to go track down a particular witness or is made aware of those things proactively, they can mount a better defense. And so there's an opportunity for us to be able to help in that process. And I wanted to make sure that I pointed that out.
That's great information. I'm sure the courts, as well as the state attorney and the public defender's office, should certainly be thankful to have volunteers from the community to help out with these cases. So that's great. Another question is, part of the movie, it was a very dramatic, emotional part of the movie where one person on death row was executed. His name in the movie, the character was Herbert Richardson, and Herb, as they called him, was a Vietnam veteran who was suffering from PTSD. And so it brings to mind the issue of inmates with mental health issues. Someone has said, and I think that the jail staff will agree, that the jail is like sometimes a hospital for the mentally ill, when it should not. There's more mentally ill persons in the jail than they are in rehabilitation centers. You want to speak to that? Maybe Ms. Scott first this time, and then Ms. Jackson.
Yes, definitely it is a huge issue locally and I'm sure nationally and statewide of an incarceration of mentally ill people. You know, I think there's a total lack of community resources for folks who are suffering from mental illness. And that's probably the root cause of why we end up having so many folks who are suffering from mental illness who also commit crimes, and then they enter into the criminal justice system, and then the criminal justice system is not equipped to adequately treat these folks. And they've gotten to a point now where maybe they've done something extremely serious because they're mentally ill. I mean, we've represented folks who were facing the death penalty, who have killed other people who were totally schizophrenic, undiagnosed schizophrenia, because schizophrenia can onset, you know, between 18 years and 25 years old is the most common onset of schizophrenia. And we've represented clients who, you know, all of a sudden are suffering from paranoid delusional schizophrenia that causes them to then act out those delusions and harm other people. And so, you know, it goes from that all the way down to folks who are in the community suffering from more less severe mental illness, who then end up committing, you know, petty crimes again and again, and aren't able to comply with the typical terms of probation that you know, something that started out small, where, you know, someone who wasn't suffering from mental illness might be able to complete a term of probation and be done with the criminal justice system. A lot of folks, they can't comply, then they get violated on probation, now they're back in jail, and over time they end up with kind of a record of criminal offenses that, in the traditional sort of matrix of how prosecutors and judges view people who keep coming before the court time and time again, they're like, well, we're going to increase the penalty and we're going to make it harder on them. And you know, and it's so the awareness that a lot of what folks are doing is because of their mental illness, and trying to get them treatment is paramount. The problem is we really lack the resources on the treatment side, and it's not because our local partners, you know, who give mental health services aren't trying. I mean, Meridian is an incredible resource. They're a great resource. I know Alachua County provides a lot of assistance when folks enter the system, but it's not near enough to address the issues. And we need to try to address the issues much sooner in the community before people get to the criminal justice system. And we're trying to put a Band-Aid on a long standing wound with a lot of scar tissue around it too. So one of the things that we've done in our office is to really try to improve our response time to people who come into the jail who are exhibiting signs of mental illness. And we do this in cooperation with the Alachua County Jail staff and also with court services in Alachua County, where we kind of have this email group where when someone comes through first appearance and there's the obvious signs of mental illness, we kind of get an alert system, and we almost have a buddy system with the jail. Well, they'll email us, and then, or we're watching, because we're at first appearance every single day. Our attorneys are alerted to watch for this so that we can respond much faster to folks who are there under obvious duress from mental illness. And it's a very complicated and expensive problem to address in our community and statewide. But I want to say that Florida is almost last in the nation in terms of community mental health funding and resources that are available to people. So I think that's an issue that we really need to address as a community in our locally and in the state. And if we do that, then I think we can start the diversion process of folks who are mentally ill away from the criminal justice system much sooner than, well, now they're arrested for an offense and we're trying to address their mental illness at the same time.
Certainly agreed. Florida is last, I think, in the nation in spending for mental health services for persons who are incarcerated. We are fortunate to have the treatment courts, the mental health court, as well as the Veterans Court and drug court. And there's a growing amount of support, if you will, for central receiving facility that will certainly help to deal with persons who are suffering from mental illness, who are caught up in the criminal justice system. But there's so much more, you're right, overall, that can be done here in the county and in the city to help those persons. Ms. Jackson, your thoughts on this issue of persons with mental health that being incarcerated in our jails?
So for me, even with that particular part, there was a lot of things that were even relevant within the movie that I wanted to bring home. Like Mr. Richardson, he said today is the first day. He did something like he never had so many people ask him how they could help him today. And mind you, it was the day that he was due to die. And so that resonated with me. He was a Vietnam vet who they knew suffered from documented PTSD, and people failed to help him. They failed to give him what he needed in order for him not to have planted the bomb on the actual porch. He fully acknowledged what he had done and was remorseful and what he had done what was wrong, but his mental health status was totally ignored. For me, that's extremely relevant here in Alachua County because the time we checked, I think it was like more than 90% of the people at the jail had documented mental health illnesses. When we also look at the actual system here, even when they have programs that are available, number one, the lack of access. So with Meridian, they are a great entity, but they're also very institutionalized. And if you are a person that has previously been incarcerated, sometimes that's not the most opportunity. Also, me helping people often who have substance abuse problems. They have substance abuse issues because of mental health issues, inability to cope, which is the mental health issues. And then what happens is when they're trying to go and get help so that they're not criminalized, if you don't have good insurance, then you have to call Meridian every day and hope that there's a bed available that becomes available within a funding bracket that you actually fit in. So there's so many people that do attempt to get help. Also, too, you know me, I'm very honest. So I must talk about the detriment that incarceration causes, especially at our jail. So we have many people that go in there that are abused mentally and physically by guards that are actually in the jail. And and then they'll send them to a mental health pod, but they do that to minimize if they want to actually file a complaint or anything, people will say, oh, they're crazy. But even outside of that, for people that are not actually incarcerated, that might be on probation or that might be on reporting where they have an ankle monitor. There was a case of a man that I just heard about just the other day. He has proven mental health issues and substance abuse issues. He's on a monitor. He's doing everything he's supposed to. Their utilities got cut off. He proactively called the probation office to say, hey, I'm trying to come up with a solution because our utilities got cut off. in the manner in which he was treated by the particular officer, it was extremely demeaning. And so I personally know people who have been to prison, and we look at things like Oz and prison movies and we think, oh, it's not that bad. Prison is actually bad as they say, and even worse. I have a loved one who's been incarcerated for almost 10 years, and often they're on lockdown because of stabbings, gang violence, drugs that are actually in there. Even young people, it breaks my heart when I see 18 to 21-year-olds that are sentenced to prison, because what happens is it creates a cycle where they have to go and join gangs in order to survive. Not because that's something they want to do. It's literally the only way that they survive. So we're talking about shanks and deaths. Those things happen actually almost every day. And even with my dad, who's been incarcerated previously, I asked him, why did you never tell me these things were happening? And he says, because you don't want to bring that weight that's not on your shoulders out to the world. So that means even when we're incarcerating people, we're increasing the levels of mental health issues because of the trauma that's already been caused being incarcerated. And then we're also incarcerating people that come from poverty-stricken areas, that might have been abused as children, that are in single-parent homes where there's a lot of trauma and things that they've seen in the neighborhoods. And so we're further perpetuating that cycle here in the particular county instead of being proactive in order to address those, and not only just give people things, but and not just medication, but to give them supports so they're able to be successful as they migrate through this, able to give them strategies and coping mechanisms. And so there's a failure with that. There's many people, I had a brother who was incarcerated in Alachua County Jail, even with mental health things, they minimized it. They ignored him. Their response was to put him into confinement. And so even as we're migrating through the system and looking at supports, there are many people that do not end up incarcerated, but they end up on probation, and they're being further traumatized. Much of it is that also we criminalize mental health. Many people that have mental health issues might be homeless. We criminalize homelessness. So we need to, number one, understand what mental health issues actually look like. They're not as serious always as schizophrenia. Anxiety is something that can be paralyzing. It can be functional, and then one day people actually have a break, and we discredit that. And then also be mindful that there's a stigma as it relates to mental health. So sometimes we can't adequately help support people because we've not even done the work proactively to actually address the stigma. So there's people that need help but refuse it because they don't want to be labeled.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. And your comments kind of speak to the need too for enhanced, expanded reentry programs to help folk who are coming out of jail and out of prison get reassociated with society, because there's difficulties for them. Like you say, they don't want to bring the weight of what was happening in prison, in jail, back out into normal society. That's where problems occur and what we call recidivism, when they actually end up back in jail, back in prison. That's not what you want. Stacey, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I think that the receptiveness by the state attorney, judges, or even juries of mental health as not a justification, but as a defense to charges or actions, or as mitigation to to a charge where someone has actually done the act, kind of like in the movie, the fellow did blow up the lady on the porch, but you present the mitigation that he had PTSD, and he, this is very, very common. What I have found is that the more serious the offense, whatever the thing the person did is, the less receptive the state attorney or the judge or even a jury is to considering the person's mental illness that they were suffering from at the time of the offense. So for less serious charges, people are more willing to listen. Oh yeah, he's suffered trauma, he's got mental illness that's been diagnosed and documented. Okay. But when you get to the level where people are committing very serious crimes because of their mental illness, it becomes so much harder to get anyone to accept a mental health defense or mitigation, because you look at the tragedy, of the person. A person is dead, a person was murdered, and there's always this inclination to, well, someone has to pay for that. We don't care if the guy was totally schizophrenic and completely suffering from a delusion that people were trying to kill him. And, you know, and we can try to show all this through evaluations and psychiatrists and, you know, past history of the same kinds of, you know, delusions or whatever. At some point, it's like people don't want to hear that when it's a really serious crime, and that's a really hard challenge for us to try to get people to understand that no, you know, even though it was a very tragic and serious thing that happened, this person still should not be punished in the same way, or maybe not even punished at all. They need help because they're suffering from a documented mental illness. And you know, I saw in the chat that there was a question about the death penalty, and I'd love to address that because it is kind of the elephant in the room here in this whole conversation that there isn't a direct question about thus far. Is that okay, Carl?
You're welcome to go forward with answering that question, Stacy.
Okay. So in the movie, you know, you see that you know, the Vietnam veteran is on death row for committing a murder, you know, that he admits that he did, but he was suffering from mental illness. And then there's other folks on the death row that are fact innocent or assert their innocence. The real elephant in the room in our state and in our country is that the death penalty is wrong. Uh, it's wrong on so many levels. It's been used, you know, disproportionately against poor people and people of color, and it's just it should just be eliminated. We spend a tremendous amount of money prosecuting and defending death penalty cases. Where and you see from the movie that you know a person is more than the worst thing that they ever did. People deserve compassion and to be treated with dignity and humanity even when they have done a horrible crime, and that we shouldn't as a society be falling down to the level of the sort of lowest common denominator, like, well, you killed someone, so we're going to kill you back. That's not what a just society does. And you know, if we eliminated the death penalty in the state, there would be millions and millions of dollars saved. So if you're concerned about, you know, the fiscal outlook of our state and how we're going to get money to provide mental health services and to do, you know, education for kids and services, you know, for pre-K kids and all the things that we want and need to do as a community that cares about every single member of our community, getting rid of the death penalty goes a really long way to providing the dollars that we need to do that. You know, one death penalty case drains my budget like you would not believe. If I get $550,000 a year to defend all the cases that I'm appointed to, which might be 15,000 cases in a year, one death penalty case can suck up $100,000 or more in one fiscal year, you know, just because we want to kill somebody for what they did instead of just giving them life in prison. If they're in fact guilty and they don't have a defense, you know, okay, you know, there are people in this world who probably should never get out because they're too dangerous. Fine. But the death penalty is barbaric. You can see it in this film, the suffering that these folks go through who are on death row. It's not Christian. I'm sorry, I don't mean to bring that up, but it's not right. And if we're fighting as public defenders, we statewide, we have an association, and we're always fighting to eliminate or to, you know, reduce the frequency of the death penalty. And we had made some real progress in the courts in recent years, which is now being reversed by the new Florida Supreme Court. But there'd been some real progress. Did you know that in Florida, up until very recently, you didn't even have to have a unanimous recommendation from a jury that a person get the death penalty? Okay, a jury hears the guilt phase, and that has to be unanimous. But then in a death penalty case, they hear the penalty phase, excuse me. And they didn't have to be unanimous. So like 6 people could say, yeah, I should die, and 6 people no, and the judge could give them the death penalty anyway. So there was some great progress based on US Supreme Court case law, and Florida adopted those rulings, which has now been reversed in the last 6 months. Just the Florida Supreme Court has just said, oh, the previous Florida Supreme Court, they were wrong. You know, on those, they were just wrong. And no, we don't really think, you know, all the progress we made in death penalty law in recent years is not all of it, but a lot of it has been reversed. And so, I mean, the financial cost of it is dramatic, and there's never been proven that it has any kind of deterrent effect, which is most of the justifications for the death penalty are, in the past anyway, have been, well, it deters people from doing heinous things. There's no proof of that.
No.
There's zero proof of that. So sorry to get on my soapbox about it, but it is a huge issue. And when you watch films like this or other films that are based around death row, you start to understand a little bit why it's so wrong to have people under sentence of death.
All right. We've been discussing the movie Just Mercy, story of Bryan Stevenson, the life of Bryan Stevenson, and how the Equal Justice Initiative was started in Montgomery. It is still there, and we certainly recommend folks to see it. We only have a few minutes left. Unfortunately, I think we could go on for a while because this is some very interesting and very important issue that we're discussing, very important to our community. But let me start kind of a wrap up, and we're going to ask each panelist to give a couple of minutes statement on this. And the movie closes with the words of Bryan Stevenson. I want to give him a chance, give Bryan a chance to get the final word in. Mr. Stevenson says, each of us is more than the worst thing that we've ever done. He says, my work with the poor and the incarcerated has persuaded me that the opposite of poverty is not wealth. The opposite of poverty is justice. Finally, I've come to believe that the true measure of our commitment to justice, the character of our society, our commitment to the rule of law, fairness, and equality cannot be measured by how we treat the rich, the powerful, the privileged, and the respected among us. The true measure of our character is how we treat the poor, the disfavored, the accused, the incarcerated, and the condemned. So in closing, I'm going to ask Ms. Shanae Jackson and our public defender, Stacey Scott, if you will, what closing words would you like to make regarding the movie and our criminal justice system here in Alachua County? Ms. Jackson?
My thoughts were, especially on what you actually just read, it resonated with me. A few years ago, T.D. Jakes said a quote, and I'll never forget it. He says that we don't incarcerate people because they're guilty. We incarcerate people because they're poor. And that's what we do. Number one, police and jails are utilized to address social issues, and there should not be. Any program that is utilized in order, or an investment that is made in order to address social issues, it always has minimal funding. So even now, you look at each police department now has a mental health component where they're trying to send people out. They have like 1 or just 2 people that are overseeing that particular department. There's no capacity as it happens to that. And then all they're able to do, if they need to refer someone out in order to help or address that, is typically refer them to an organization that typically is strapped. So there's a lack of actual access. And so then it becomes a cycle that perpetuates. You have many people that are incarcerated now for petty theft. Because on paper it looks bad. They stole 3 times, but it could be that they were stealing food. It could be like one time a mom, she stole a belt. She stole a tie because her son needed to graduate and she didn't have any particular money. So in Alachua County, we have the largest disparities in all quality of life indicators. So the primary way in order to address incarceration is to address those quality of life indicators. That is to get people adequately housed. That is to address healthcare issues. I know people who so because they needed medicine. We're not, the justice system does not care. If a person has many, or the reason sometimes for the particular theft, sometimes they just don't get those particular do-overs. We need to adequately educate children because it gives them a leg up in order to be a viable member of society. We need to invest more into youth programs. One of the issues that we're having now is we're seeing a great influx in crime as it pertains to our youth. There's nothing for them to do. There is nowhere to go. And especially youth in communities that have very limited resources, all they see is what they see, which is people hanging out on the corner and those particular things. So we even can talk about the policing issue, but prior to us even getting there, we need to have better nets of support, better infrastructure in order to not only to protect the people in our communities, but also to empower them so that they don't become subject to whatever that is, and they can break whatever that generational cycle actually is. And so if we look at poverty in a different way, we won't look at people as being, we won't dehumanize people, we won't criminalize them, and we'll change that. Right now, what we do is we blame people for poverty. And I personally believe is that people blame people for their own poverty because then it gives them the excuse not to engage in solutions in order to be able to circumvent that. And what we do is we wait till the holidays and we give out gift baskets and we buy their children toys, but we don't care about them for the rest of the year. And so it's a cycle that actually perpetuates. And those are kids that actually grow up in a community, and we see a lot of the things that we're seeing. So that's number one, but also two, by changing social issues and helping law enforcement to proactively be involved in the change regarding social issues, it puts them close to the issues and they see it in a different manner in order for them to have a level of compassion that they often do not have. And so a lot of times when you see people that have had a change of heart that are within the system, it's because they've engaged with families in a different manner, not just a law enforcement officer that showed up to their house and I'm taking somebody to jail because I'm on, because I'm at work. So for me in Alachua County, that is, but also as well, looking at our court system as a whole, because even though it starts with law enforcement and then it goes through litigation with the state attorney and the public defender, we have some judges that are horrible, just for lack of a better way. And I know that people are sad that Judge Glant is dead. I'm not. He was nicknamed Father Time. It was his goal was to give people as much time as possible. And he handed out sentences that are more than 1,000,000 years. And so that is not okay. And so for me, even now we have sitting judges that many people are actually know are horrible. We have attorneys that are scared of those judges. And so they won't even mount an aggressive defense because they don't want to make the judge upset. And so we can't help our people in our community under those conditions.
All right, thank you, Ms. Jackson. Ms. Scott, final words?
Yes, I think in watching the movie, that one of the things that resonated as true with me is when Johnny B says, he lost his truth, being in there for so long and being denied so many times to have the truth heard. And one of the things I've learned, a bunch of things, wonderful things and horrible things and really deep things in doing this work. And one of them is that the truth is not enough. You've got to have a fair process and a fair trial, and you have to have representation in court. It doesn't matter how good or fair a prosecutor is if there isn't a defense lawyer on the other side to represent the client zealously and present that truth aggressively to the prosecutor, to the judge, and to the jury. And because our system is an adversary system, and it depends on that tension between the government and the defense attorney. So it's like the might of the government, all the law enforcement, the prosecutor, everything versus the defense attorney and the client. And so the truth is not enough. You've got to be armed with a lawyer who has the resources to be able to defend your case. The other things I've learned in doing this work is that there's always another side to the story. That what a person accused of is not always true, and what a person has done, even if they've done something wrong, is not who the person is. And you've got to be able to get past that, to know the person, to understand the circumstances that led them to commit a crime, to come before the court in order to adequately fight for that client to get the best possible outcome. The other things we learned is that good people do bad things. there are good people who do bad things, sometimes for a good reason, sometimes for no reason at all. And that, but for the grace of God, could be any member of our family, anyone that you know, could be the person who snaps and does something bad that is serious, and now they're facing a life-altering consequence in the criminal justice system. So, it's easy to sit back and sort of read the paper and say, oh, that guy did that. Wow, he deserves to go to prison for life. Well, no, it's not that simple. Like, you've really got to understand that anybody can do something that's wrong, whether it's intentional or not. Think about, like, even a DUI that could turn into a DUI manslaughter, in an instant. People don't intend in those cases to hurt anyone. And so you've got to understand the whole person and the whole circumstance, and look at situations fairly and with some measure of compassion, and understanding of, that we're all flawed as humans, and that any good person can do something that's bad. um, Life can change in a heartbeat. The other thing I've learned through this work is that there are children in our community that are living in incredibly horrible, unstable lives, who are very likely to be suffering from traumas, who are going to enter our criminal justice system at some point in their lives, and that's a travesty. So, I hope that, through this discussion, and through watching the movie, and seeing, the realities that are faced by folks in our community every day, that we can all do everything in our power to help the children in our community, because, it doesn't matter if it's my child or it's your child, they're all our children, to make sure that they get what they need, that they aren't suffering the traumas that folks are suffering in our community every day, and that we can keep them on the right path, and create a path for them in many circumstances, so that they don't end up in our criminal justice system. So it's an honor, to do this work. It's my passion. I've done it for a long time, and, we're not, nobody's perfect, and our agency isn't perfect, but know that we are striving every single day to make sure that we get better, and that every client gets the representation that they deserve.
Thank you, Stacy. Unfortunately, we are out of time, and matter of fact, we went over time a little bit. But this is such an important discussion that I hope folk will understand and excuse us for that. I want to thank our panelists. Great panel discussion. Thank you for sharing information and your insight to this particular issues that were brought out in the movie Just Mercy. So thank you, our community organizer, Ms. Shanae Jackson, and our public defender, Ms. Stacy Scott. Also want to thank the United Church of Gainesville for helping to sponsor this. Ms. May Smith Sherry, who helped put it together, and she's been helping us with the technology today, along with Shauna Swires, and we just appreciate you, as well as the Alachua County Community Remembrance Project, and Ms. Jackie Davis, who's also a community organizer, and the work that she does. Thank you so much again for joining in on this panel discussion on Just